Welcome back. It's now my pleasure to introduce Aneesh Chopra. Aneesh served as President Obama's first Chief Technology Officer in his first term and previously had been the Secretary of Technology for the state of Virginia. I had the opportunity to interact with Aneesh at EDUCAUSE a few years ago, where he was talking about the potential for open data and open innovation and where that could take the nation in terms of startups and students being involved with creating companies drawing on open data. And I thought it would be really good for us to hear what he has learned as he's continued to work and think about innovation and openness. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome Aneesh Chopra.
All right. Hello. I want to begin by saying how much I am grateful for Brad. As you know, Brad was recently honored for his leadership by EDUCAUSE, the nation's leading organization. Can you give him a round of applause for Brad? When we thought about engaging on technology and innovation matters in higher education, Brad was among the first of the folks that I would call. So it's a real privilege for me to join you today and be a part of your continuing focus on always learning. This is a tremendous gathering, and it's particularly interesting to contrast a discussion about sort of closed security concerns with this spirit of openness and collaboration. And the contrast is an interesting one as you grapple with how much of your institution's assets digitally become open, and how do you do that while balancing privacy and security concerns. So if you'll indulge me for the next many minutes, I'd love to walk you through a journey of how I believe the next decade of our country will be defined by our capacity to innovate, largely around open data, but in large part in a spirit of collaboration to fix growth opportunities in the sectors that our economy needs, where the most innovation should flourish: health, energy, and education. But to get started, I might provide a little bit of a roadmap for this conversation by sharing with you how we intend to walk through this journey together. I want to begin with an early set of remarks on the innovation imperative. What is it that's happening in the American economy and our place in the world? And why is innovation and openness so critical for our long-term success? The second section of my remarks will focus on these growth markets. What specifically are we doing to promote innovation in health, in energy, and in education markets? And last but certainly not least, while our government is run with 3 million or so Americans at the center, federal employees, we're a nation of over 300 million people. How can we uncover the hidden talent throughout the country in communities all across every neighborhood we live in, and we have friends and neighbors, so we can uncover that talent and put it to best use to solve these big challenges? This is the journey I'd love to walk you through this morning. But I want to start with my journey and my family's journey. I had the honor and privilege, as Brad mentioned, to serve as our nation's first Chief Technology Officer. But I wanted to put this in context for where my family has come from. I'm the son of immigrants, like many in this university community. This is the village where my father and his elder brother grew up. This is me visiting them at the age of 11. I was visiting India for the first time, and I was struck by the lack of infrastructure. In this village, there was no indoor plumbing, no real paved roads, no significant infrastructure. And I was struck because I was curious how this nation of soon to be 1 billion people would plug into the 21st century economy when it had such limitations on its capacity to connect people to jobs and more generally economic opportunity. Contrast this visit when I was 11 to my visit with President Barack Obama in November of 2010. The president very much wanted to visit a rural community, but for security reasons wasn't able to. So we brought one to him via high-definition video conference. The village in particular we brought to the president was very similar to the one where my father grew up. To this day, no indoor plumbing, no traditional forms of infrastructure. About 50 kilometers or so from any significant urban environment. But this particular village was unique. 90 days earlier, the government of India flipped the switch on an experiment to connect rural communities to 21st century infrastructure. My counterpart, the Chief Technology Officer and Innovation Advisor to the Prime Minister, chose to run an experiment. What would happen in a community if you dropped fiber broadband to the village center and a 4G, in this case, WiMAX tower for wireless connectivity throughout the village? At 2 weeks' notice, the village was wired up and ready to go. In fact, the joke was we were visiting in prep for the president's trip that 90 days earlier, and that was the impetus in many ways for them to set up the infrastructure. And so with 2 weeks' notice, these villagers were connected to this infrastructure, and 90 days later, they had the opportunity to present their story directly to President Obama, who wanted to know what happens in a community that has this type of connectivity. The president heard 3 stories. First was an awkward story. It was a farmer who shared with the president the good news on a bad news situation. A year earlier, the farmer tried to borrow money from the local bank to pay for the seeds to get the crops going and to be successful. The bank required a certified copy of his land records, and the farmer had traveled to the urban center to go get those records, but came up empty. Now, he didn't say this, but I interpreted that to mean he was asked for some kind of extra transactional fee that was not part of the process, and he was unsuccessful. So he ended up having to rely on a moneylender to provide the capital for his farm. This year, however, he shared with the president that he was able to walk right into the village center, which in this case is a room smaller than this stage, maybe just a few sections of the stage, where he had the authority to print out that certified copy of the land record right there in the village, was able to go to a bank this year and obtain a market rate loan. The second student spoke up, a young man who faced this very difficult choice. He was the only surviving child of a grandmother who had fallen ill in the village, but he was at graduate school earning his MBA, and he had that very difficult stress. Do I drop out of school to care for my grandmother? I'm the last one available to do that. Or can I find an alternative route? Thanks to this infrastructure, he essentially teleconferenced into his courses and was able to complete his studies. And then a nurse shared with the president that now when she visits the village, she's able to look up in real time the immunization records for the kids in the village so she could be more precise in her interventions. All in 90 days, all with nothing but 21st century digital infrastructure. It compelled the president to make the following statement, that one of the incredible benefits of technology is that it can position one to leapfrog the operative word, some of the intermediate stages of government service delivery and going straight to the 21st. So this is a bit of the journey. The village is the same, but for one big difference. It's been powered by technology and innovation. Second story I want to share at the outset is early in my tenure. It was the fall of 2009. We had the great privilege of celebrating the 40th anniversary of the internet. And our good friends at DARPA that had made the initial investments in technical work to get the internet off the ground decided to commemorate the anniversary with a bit of a competition. Any of you in this room heard of or participated in the DARPA Red Balloon Challenge? Anyone here? One of you. Well, I want to share with you the story of the MIT Media Lab to give you a sense for what happened and just the sheer power of openness and connectivity. Well, first, what's the challenge? DARPA decided to do something that they didn't really know how they would go about solving, but that, in a sense, was the whole point. They said that in 90 days from this September launch, They were going to float 10 red balloons in undisclosed parts of the country. The first team that reports back to DARPA the latitude and longitude for each of the 10 red balloons would win a $40,000 prize. Now, they had no idea how one would go about recruiting a team, let alone how they would operationalize this hunt for red balloons. Well, almost immediately, teams from all over the country began signing up and had taken on their strategies to find the red balloons. But 3 days before the actual launch of the balloons, word hit the MIT Media Lab, where my good friend Riley Crane decided that he wanted to join the competition. 72 hours before the balloon launched, the grand total of the individuals on this planet that knew that Riley wanted to have a team was less than 10, his colleagues at the Media Lab. And they sat at a counter or at a table around a conference room, and they brainstormed what they could do. Riley didn't want to introduce some new technology. He decided to introduce an innovation of the business model variety. He decided to take the prize money and establish an incentive structure that might appeal to more folks who'd want to participate. He took the fair market value of the balloon, finding one balloon's worth $4,000, and he cut the value in half and said, if you are the one who reports the balloon with the accurate number, you get $2,000. But the person who recruited you to the network would get $1,000. And the person who recruited that person to the network would get $500. And again to $250. He created a tiered incentive structure where everybody had a stake in the outcome. Within an hour or two of his idea, thousands of people got wind and signed up to join the cause. And together, they activated over 3 million people through social media. So just take this into context. It took 90 days, call this 87, for other teams to get up and running. Riley had to catch up, and in 3 days, built the award-winning team. They found every one of the balloons in less than 9 hours. Less than 9 hours. So you take a look at the environment we're in, the opportunity to leapfrog legacy infrastructure with what you're seeing all around the world, and the limitless potential to solve big, difficult, complex challenges in new and creative ways. This is why I'm so bullish on this decade for the American story in fixing the challenges that confront us. The president spoke of this in a document we worked on called The Strategy for American Innovation. By a show of hands, have any of you read or heard of The Strategy for American Innovation? A couple of you. Thank you. whitehouse.gov/innovation. The centerpiece of this study is depicted on this pyramid. It basically outlines the role of government in spurring long-term economic growth. And the president's vision, technology and innovation are at the center of long-term economic growth, and it's defined by 3 key attributes. Number 1, the notion of 21st century infrastructure, or the building blocks of innovation. Traditionally, if you were to ask, Congressman Hamilton was here, if you'd asked what are the building blocks of an economy, you would hear the 3 R's: roadways, railways, runways, infrastructure that we know. But in today's economy, infrastructure is almost equally defined by the attributes at the bottom of this slide. Human capital, what you do every day in educating the leaders of tomorrow. Infrastructure broadly defined, like we saw in India, with information technology at the foundation. And the intersection of intelligence to legacy infrastructure, what you might think of the Internet of Things, to help us get smarter about what the economy looks like and how well is it performing. So the first role is to make these thoughtful investments. The second role is to set rules of the road. Now, the morning panel was all about the challenges of privacy and security. These are rules of the road. And in an innovation economy, we need to do as much as we can to promote market-based innovation. So you'll hear some traditional policies around tax credits for innovation, commercialization activity, but you'll also hear very specifically in a digital environment the importance of getting privacy and security right. Last but certainly not least, the president spoke of our country tapping into all the expertise of the nation for catalyzing breakthroughs. And it is in this latter category where I'll spend the bulk of our time today describing what it means to thinking about openness and innovation. Before leaving the administration, the president asked if I could sort of codify, if you will, a set of attributes for what it means to be an open innovator in the public sector. And we referred to this as the Open Innovators Toolkit, which defines 4 key roles that the public sector can play in fostering these breakthroughs. Number 1, we can open up data and encourage its use. Number 2, we can play the role of convener, or as I like to say, an impatient convener, to bring parties together that lower barriers to entry and promote more shots on goal. Third, we think about that spirit of ingenuity that has been the hallmark of America, and we start incorporating prizes, challenges, and competitions into the fabric of our policymaking to tap into external expertise. And last but certainly not least, we celebrate and cultivate entrepreneurship as a value even within our own workforce. So I'd like to walk you through a few of these attributes and then provide the context for why health, energy, and education are ripe for change. First, the importance of a robust infrastructure. Now, this is timely because I understand that here at IU, you're in the midst of an IT transformation. You're building a robust foundation for all the business units that are in need of your services. We went through a similar endeavor when I was Virginia's Secretary of Technology. We walked in the door, my predecessor and the prior governor had walked into the door and uncovered untold stories of inefficiency. If you added up all the servers that we had on our balance sheet and actually measured utilization, we were, I think, a little under 20% of all the server capacity actually in use. The cybersecurity protections were absolutely de minimis. Each agency was responsible for security, and therefore we had none of the scale you'd need to actually identify threats and to handle them in a thoughtful way. We had completely disjointed haves and have-nots. So some federal agency would fund one state agency with robust technology support, so they'd have kind of the Cadillac offering, and then you'd have others that were struggling to sort of put 2 cents together, and they had the bare bones, independent of their value or mission, to their contribution to the mission of the Commonwealth. And if you took a look at anything, PC refresh cycles, just the modernization of the data centers in general, we were behind the curve. I think at last count we had north of 200 independent data centers, and I use the term loosely. We had some data centers that would be seen as sort of a couple of boxes in a closet. I'm sure this is not unusual, right? Right, okay. So we went through a pretty painful process. Our state legislature refused to fund the transformation, so we had to enter into a creative public-private partnership. What we did was we invited a third party to come in and actually front the investment, north of $270 million. And that to finance the investment, they would have the operational maintenance work for the next decade, and any savings they could achieve by modernizing the infrastructure would allow them to sort of pay back the investment that they had initially made. The taxpayers of Virginia were promised a flatlining, if you will, of IT spend, and for that, we would get dramatic improvements in our infrastructure. IT now is treated like a utility service, and with consistency, providing a little bit more reliability and security on the assets that are collected, regardless of the agency that you're in. Now, transformations are not easy, and depending on your process and how you're going through it, I'm sure it's difficult. I'll just share one little anecdote to give you a sense for how hard it was to kind of standardize the infrastructure. We thought that some of these basic applications like email and your PC could more easily be standardized across the enterprise. Well, it turns out that was not true. One of my agencies that I remember fondly is the wrong word, perhaps with disdain, but the agency had, like cowboy culture, they had coded into their email client a whole series of other security and logon activities. So when we swapped out email for sort of upgrades and modern day service, unintentionally we knocked out access to all these critical applications. No one documented anything, nothing. It was all cowboy culture. So it was not a very smooth process. But the outcome is a more robust utility service that will support the mission needs of the organization. We talked about rules of the road, and I thought I'd bring some context. It was really helpful to hear the conversation earlier today. Why is this so difficult? Why is security and privacy something that is hard to get our arms around? Well, my good friends at DARPA published this graphic, which just gave me a sense for the level of the problem. If you can follow along, malware has been consistently small in terms of lines of code, about 125 lines of code to present a threat to the organization. Yet, if you take a look at today's commercially available security applications, we're now north of 10 million lines of code. So we've got this divergence of threat. The 125 lines of code can attack us with the same ferocity, even though we've been bulking up in our security posture. This just tells you the challenge that we're facing globally in protecting our data assets. The privacy issue is an interesting one. Part of what I tried to do on the privacy debate was shift it from kind of what I call the lawyerly debate about what you can or cannot do to more of a technical one, more defined by knobs and dials that individual users would have control over. And you had some of that in the dialogue earlier today, which is the data itself might be available, but it will be controlled by a set of rules and conditions that we have the authority to set. This culminated in the president's call to action, challenging the private sector to set up do not track functionality so that if I wanted better control over, say, my browsing history, I want to have the knobs and dials at my disposal to set what level of sharing I'd like to have. What level of personalization would I want in ads in order to have a better experience on the internet? That control is mine, not constrained by some artificial barrier. This call to action on an Internet Privacy Bill of Rights has not yet moved forward. This requires congressional action, but the do not track work, though stalled, I hope still holds promise for how an industry can come together to define the rules of the road and then provide this functionality to the American people. The third aspect of the innovation strategy, if we've talked about the infrastructure, we've talked about rules of the road, the third aspect is what does open innovation look like? Now I'm going to spend the bulk of my remarks now finishing up that argument, but I wanted to give you one slide to tell you why open innovation matters. Now this is an interesting story. NASA has been grappling with the problem of mapping dark matter and measuring solar activity and a whole range of monitoring and computational work around predicting solar flares, for example. And they found that their rate of productivity was falling. They had sort of reached a level where they were looking for new ideas, a fresher approach. So as part of the president's open innovation agenda, they turned to a startup in California called Kaggle, Kaggle, and they ran a competition. And the competition was modest. I think it was in the tens of thousands of dollars. But the premise was, how might you help solve the problem of measuring this dark matter? What can you do about it? Well, exactly as we would expect, tapping into expertise from people who don't do this for a living, might create opportunity for innovation. So within 2 weeks of the contest's launch, a PhD in glaciology, is that the term? Whatever it is. It's the study of glaciers. Someone in this room might know what that is. Someone here might even be doing that work. A person looking essentially on the earth, not in the sky, took his predictive models, looking at the edge of glaciers and measuring their activity, applied it to the NASA challenge, and instantly, effectively doubled their productivity rate. 2 weeks. Open innovation is about this philosophy, that if we engage the expertise of the world, we can solve big challenges that might feel like we've been up against a brick wall in our own little corner of the world, but the potential for breakthroughs still exist. So the question now is, how does one create a culture of innovation, and then how might we apply that culture into the sectors of the economy that need help the most? I turned to a startup within the government. Many of you might have read about the Dodd-Frank bill, the bill that came out in the wake of all of the challenges on Wall Street in the economy. Homeowners, mortgages, obviously an area of great concern. Why did we allow this sector of the economy to underperform? So buried in the Dodd-Frank law was the creation of a brand new agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the president asked Elizabeth Warren, now Senator Elizabeth Warren, to lead the charge. Within days of her arrival, we had the pleasure of getting together for lunch, and we chatted about the operating culture she intended to have in the agency. And I asked if she would wish it to operate in the culture of a Silicon Valley startup. Now, this is a government agency, so these things might seem a bit counterintuitive. But she said, I would love to embrace data as an asset and to adopt the culture that has kind of that Silicon Valley ethos on day one, that we're going to need to bring creative minds. So we decided to put this to work in the first act of the agency. You know, if any of you have bought a home before, you know that filling out those papers is kind of an annoying exercise at the time of the signing. I think there are like 2 or 3 forms in particular, the HUD-1 and a few others that I can't quite remember the name of. And the law explicitly said, by regulation, the new Consumer Protection Bureau is supposed to design a consolidated form, a simple form. Now, the rulemaking process, for those who follow kind of, government culture, you'd have to have a confirmed head of the agency, and then you'd have a year or 2 on the clock for the rules to even get formalized or codified. And because of the politics of the agency, we didn't have a confirmed secretary for the first couple of years. But that didn't stop the agency from adopting this startup culture to solve the problem. We decided to crowdsource the activity. So within months of the agency's launch, a website went up called knowbeforeyouowe.gov, and it invited the public to provide feedback. 30,000 Americans actually looked at these draft forms, suggested where they saw problems, and offered suggestions for improvement. This process of engaging the public happened 7 times over the course of a year, year and a half. You can see the heat map from the agency's human testing to see what is it that people saw that was useful, where were their challenges, and how might they iterate and improve. This allowed President Obama to present the Homeowners' Bill of Rights long before the official regulatory process had even begun. I don't even think it's still codified in rules, but the public had been engaged and the product had been built in that spirit of a lean government startup. So with that background, I thought I'd share some perspectives on where I see the biggest opportunities for growth and why this is a 2-for-1 deal, good for the American economy and will solve big problems. This is a slide from McKinsey, the McKinsey Global Institute more specifically, and it presented a very interesting data point. It suggests that job creation follows industry sectors that become more productive. Now, I always thought, maybe foolishly, that productivity meant doing more with less, that it's actually fewer jobs, not more jobs. So when McKinsey published this, it was a bit confusing. What McKinsey found is that when industry sectors as a whole become more productive, they're putting their capital to higher and better use, which creates more opportunity, which creates growth. And if you look at the top of this slide, you can see the sectors of the American economy that have done very well, creating jobs and becoming more productive. And if you looked at the MIT research, it is the introduction of data-driven decision-making that can boost the industry's overall productivity rate between 5 and 6%. So I looked down the list and I said, what are the sectors of the American economy that have not seen productivity growth? And you can see them circled in there. And with all due respect to my friends here at IU, the reality is that healthcare and education are two of the sectors that have struggled with the question of productivity growth. And I will add to that list our utility industry to suggest that if we can find a way to make the sectors more productive, we can create more jobs and hopefully solve these financial conundrums that we're in. Literally fixing healthcare and education as cost centers to the American economy, looking at inputs and outputs, will literally be the fuel that charges our next decade of growth. Could be the fuel. So what are the opportunities in each of these sectors, and why am I so bullish that we're going to make a difference? I want to talk about healthcare for a moment. It is unfortunate that we're having this conversation weeks after this difficult launch of healthcare.gov, but I wanted to take a step back from healthcare.gov to provide for you why I think the industry is still poised for change, glitches and all. There are 3 reasons why I believe there's never been a better time to be an innovator in healthcare than right now. Number 1, we are opening up more data than had ever been made publicly available before. Literally at HHS, there are billions of dollars of data sets sitting in servers and in file cabinets that are now, for the first time, publicly available. Second, we are digitizing that which was previously on paper. So if you take a look at the average physician's office today, we're now well north of 50% of doctors and hospitals that are digital, that have adopted electronic health records. And that these new digital assets are also opening up and enabling new products and services on top. And then last but certainly not least, what's on this slide. We are changing what we pay for in the American healthcare system. Show of hands, how many of you are on the healthcare side here in the IU family? Any of you on the health side? A few of you. Well, let me just give a quick overview of what we're seeing on the payment side and provide context for why I'm so excited about this moment in time. It used to be, and for the most part currently still is, though changing, that whatever your condition, if you needed to get care, you would visit the emergency room, you'd visit a clinic, you'd come into the hospital. The organization would get paid to treat the service that you came in for. If you left the organization, there would be no further economic relationship, despite the fact that what happens after you leave is almost as important as what happened while you were in terms of your long-term health. 1 out of every 5 patients who discharges from the emergency room comes right back within 30 days. In large part for things that are controllable. They didn't take their meds, they didn't get a follow-up appointment with the doctor to make sure that their vital signs are under control. For these reasons, there's been this gap in the care quality because no one's paid for that service. You know, one of the ways we get measured in service to the president is how often is your stuff in the State of the Union. And I remember in this 2011 State of the Union, President shared a line that really spoke to this. He was talking about wireless technology and the power of 21st century infrastructure. It was winning the future was the theme. And he made a statement that said, imagine a time where a patient can FaceTime video chat their doctor. There's no technical reason why a patient can't FaceTime video chat their doctor today. But do they do it? No, it's not reimbursable. It's not reimbursable. So you have to go to the doctor's office for the 6-minute visit, for the 2-second validation that you're okay, because that's what we reimburse. Not anymore. This chart shows you all of the specific new models of care payments that are changing what we do with data to make healthcare work. We are creating medical homes so that primary care doctors can be essentially your physical and now virtual gatekeeper, where they collect all the data on your behalf and could conceivably tell you, by the way, you haven't gotten your foot exam and you're a diabetic and it's important for us to check. So care gaps are now being discovered by these medical homes. Accountable care organizations, when hospitals and doctors and others come together to say, we'll take responsibility. So it doesn't matter who you see in the organization, we're going to make sure that you're getting all the right treatments that you need to get to stay healthy. Even if you see a specialist, you should make sure your blood pressure is under control and so forth. Bundled payments changes this whole idea of what it means to come in for hip surgery, for example, where now we can bundle in all the post and pre-services beyond the surgery to make sure that you have a better experience. And that readmission rate that I was describing that now motivates hospitals as of last October to actually provide follow-on care so that you don't show up again because of something that's very routine and easy to address. These new payment models are ushering in a whole new set of technologies. We're now mining patients' data. It's funny, anyone in this room a doctor or an IT clinician, physician clinician, IT? Well, if you ask the doctor, when you walk into the clinic, what are the list of patients that you're treating? It's who calls the office for an appointment. But IT could tell you with predictive models, who are the 10 patients that if you don't talk to today are going to have an adverse health outcome? Produce the list. Show me the list of those at-risk patients. That's coming. Care integration tools, the ability to communicate with patients on text messaging or FaceTime video chats, as the president said. New ways of engaging consumers. I was talking to the executive team at Walgreens just this week. Today, Walgreens is processing a prescription refill every second on a mobile device. We are engaging people in new ways. What are some of the applications that we've seen come out of this confluence of innovation factors? Well, I'll give you a quick overview of what's been powered by open data. I'm particularly fond of iTriage. An emergency room doctor at a hospital in Colorado came to visit me at the White House and basically said, too many people are going to the emergency room when they should be getting their care elsewhere. It also happens to be elsewhere being lower cost. And he decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a bunch of programmers and he built an iPhone app called iTriage. And the nature of the conversation that we had was, what might the government have in terms of data that could make that application more useful? Well, it turns out we keep a provider directory of any organization in the country that can care for patients. And we particularly have a list of all of the federally qualified health centers that happen to be lower cost. Now today, we ask you to visit hhs.gov to find that directory of providers. Raise your hand if anyone has visited hhs.gov for purposes of looking for a lower cost provider. Let the records show that not a single hand has gone up. And that's fine. You shouldn't really have to know to visit hhs.gov to access the data. So by opening it up, within a few months, iTriage took the exact same database and integrated it into their workflow. So if you've gone through their application, it says you don't have to go to the ER, you can go to a clinic. It pulls the geo file from your phone, your GPS location with your permission, and it tells you what are the low-cost clinics that are available to you in your backyard. At no cost to the taxpayer and at no cost to their consumers, iTriage ran this without a lot of fanfare. In its first year, iTriage generated 100,000 referrals to federally qualified health centers in this country. People had access to data where they were, and that empowered them to make a choice that was better for their health condition and lower cost to society. Second case study, the story of iBlueButton. If you take a look at healthcare, we've got aggregate data that HHS would collect that would include provider directories, medical information, spending data, research data. But our sensitive personal data sits in these systems that are digital, but they're still in the confines of the organization that we're in. Well, we had a bit of an epiphany, and it asked the question, HIPAA had always been cited as a reason why people can't share data for privacy and security. But the centerpiece of HIPAA had always been that the consumer is entitled to their own data. So what we said was, there should be a very simple way, as the president said in August of 2010, there should be a single blue button that a patient could push that would allow them to download his or her medical information and do with it what they wish. Store it on their iPhone, keep it as a printed copy, store it in an online data locker, whatever they want, it's their data. And to make that promise, he said, I will direct the VA to offer this service to every veteran this fall. It didn't take us 90 days to have the service up and running. And when Secretary Shinseki asked, how many veterans do we think will actually access the service? My colleague Peter Levin, the CTO at the VA, said maybe a few thousand, maybe 25,000 if we're lucky. Within its first year, over 1 million veterans downloaded and accessed their own Blue Button file. In fact, the chief medical information officer of the VA himself, a disabled veteran, found himself using Blue Button in the most inopportune circumstance. He had fallen off of the wheelchair lift to get into a van and had hit his head, was bleeding and was rushed to the emergency room, had a difficult time speaking. But he was able to call up his Blue Button file, which listed all the medications that he was on. And the emergency room doctor, having access to that information from the patient, was able to change the medication intervention, which actually saved his life because he had access to that list on his device. iBlueButton is just one commercial example. There are now dozens of private companies that are trying to provide a commercially viable service so that if you wanted to download your Blue Button file, you can store it with them. The reason I love iBlueButton is that I used it, my father's on Medicare. It took me about 90 seconds to set up my father's mymedicare.gov account. And instantly, I shared it with iBlueButton, and now, wherever I am, I have a list of all the doctors that are treating my dad, including their contact information, if I need it. I have all the conditions that my dad has. I can click on any of those conditions and get sent over to the National Library of Medicine and get back, a few paragraphs of information to explain to me in English what's wrong. And if I needed to, I can transmit my dad's medical records to anyone that is safely and securely available for me to share. If you look at the video for iBlueButton, they've got an example where grandma is fist bumping her medical record to a physician as she's transferred from the hospital to the nursing home. So these examples, I'll share just one more to give you a sense for what's coming, give us great hope that we're in the first, maybe second, maybe third inning of a very exciting journey where innovation will bring better value to the American healthcare system at lower cost. The last story I wanted to share with you is of my friend Asmopoulos, who had been a researcher at the University of Wisconsin. He's a public health researcher. He doesn't even have broadband in his house. But he said, look, Anish, I see great potential in treating asthma not as a chemical problem, you've got to ingest this inhaler, but as a data problem. He decided to add a GPS chip, roughly $15, on top of an asthma inhaler. So he could record the time and the location of an asthma attack. Any patient that's on this system can share this back with their physician, and then the physician can provide guidance as to environmental factors and locations that they might wish to avoid as part of their daily commute. The provision back of the Asthmopolis data in his earliest trial cut uncontrollable asthma by 50%. He's a startup raising millions of dollars of venture capital. Walgreens is experimenting with him in the Louisville market to see whether or not this could have an impact. Already, the mayor of Louisville has publicly reported that he's adjusted some of his environmental protection government resources because they've uncovered areas where asthma attacks have been more frequent in the town, and so now he's putting resources to address the pollutants that happen to derive from that area. One funny little example of what this looks like, about a day or two before our health data palooza in 2010, a physician, Ronnie Ziegler at Google, decided to run a little bit of an experiment. The HHS has data on all kinds of quality and patient satisfaction measures for every hospital in the country. It's available on a website, hospitalcompare.gov. Anyone visit that? The IU staff? A couple of you have to by rules. Well, again, that's one way of interfacing with the data. The other is what Ronnie did. Ronnie wrote a blog post. Where in New York City is the best place for you to have chest pain? He created an index. He mapped every hospital in New York on a set of heart-friendly and people-friendly factors. My particularly favorite one is, apparently we track something called quiet at night. If you had a good night's sleep in the hospital. There isn't a single hospital in New York City that's north of 50%, by the way. But here's the point. The point is, Ronnie, in accessing the open data, could take the raw file, put it in Google Fusion tables, and then run a Google Maps integrated with data outcomes so that he could provide this contextually relevant information, and he did so in a matter of days because he wanted to present this at the Health Data Palooza. There is absolutely no barrier to entry for this initiative. Let's move on to education. As all of you know, education is the hallmark of the American success story. Our educational attainment rates for the past several decades have virtually guaranteed our leadership status as an innovation hub for the world. Unfortunately, as all of you now know, we've fallen a bit on educational attainment. Despite our investments in higher ed, we are now 9th in the share of our population, the young adults, that have a college degree. And if you benchmarked us against the other countries, you can see that they're rocketing fast and furious to get their folks educated. The message is out. An educated workforce is key to an innovation economy. So the president has called for an unprecedented set of activities, including opening up data through the college scorecard and proposing new pay-for-outcomes models that would reward schools if they're successful in getting folks to complete degrees. In the words of Arne Duncan, who was speaking mostly about the K-12 system, it's time to stop treating the problem of educational productivity as a grinding, eat-your-broccoli exercise. It is a time for innovation and accelerating progress. The innovation agenda is coming to education, and you live it every day with MOOCs and the entire open data revolution. I wanted to give you one snapshot at open data from my home state of Virginia. We were the first state in the country to publish our linked student outcomes file. If you go to high school in Virginia, college in Virginia, and have a job in Virginia, we can report your starting salary by degree, by institution. This is a screenshot that on the headline that says the 2-year community college technical degrees have a $10,000 a year edge on the 4-year social science degrees for starting salaries. And there's a lot of dispute. Why is that relevant? That shouldn't matter. What are we doing? The premise is this information is coming, and it'll be in the hands of students in new and creative ways. As we go about empowering students with information to make better choices for their career, these data sets will start to arise. By the way, I did a look on undergraduate business degrees, and it turned out I had thought that the UVA McIntire School, which UVA was ranked in all the, kind of the U.S. News kind of things as the best, actually underperformed the University of Richmond on starting salaries and success factors by the statewide longitudinal data systems. Now, again, it's got limits, and we're not where we need to be, but the point is it's now coming. The open data revolution is here. Another aspect of this is to make it easier for clinicians, for professors, for frontline workers to share information. Call this the internet on top of the internet, or the learning internet. If we believe in a personalized learning environment, well, one of the things we have to do is to do a better job of sharing what we're doing in the first place. I want to highlight the Learning Registry. Anyone here participating in the Learning Registry, learningregistry.org? It is an attempt to standardize content on the internet for educational purposes by standardizing the metadata. So what we've done in the Learning Registry under Secretary Duncan's leadership is allow us, we started with our own assets, National Science Foundation data, NASA data, anything that's useful in the educational context. We are tagging those objects aligned to the Common Core and aligned to a variety of other assets. You can see just one case study of how this actually impacts K-12 education. This is a Mozilla plugin browser that has access to the Learning Registry database. So while you search for something around interactive surface area, the Google-like results appear, but in the yellow highlighted text is essentially a Google-like search, but only on those tagged objects in the Learning Registry. So you can then see where those objects have been used, and you can call up one of them, which is a lesson plan by this teacher named Kimberly Bauman, where she's referencing the Mars rover video as part of a larger curriculum, something around engineering design. And there's even the opportunity to create Facebook newsfeed-like services to say, hey, the anatomy of a Mars rover video has now been incorporated into a lesson plan. Click here to learn more. I have met more K-12 teachers who are constrained in their lesson plans by what's been handed down to them on paper or what's on their Word, file in their local hard drive. The degree to which people are sharing their learning objects is dramatically low. And my humble opinion is that we are on the verge of a new 21st century educational organizational model that is built around three key attributes: a faster path to new concepts of what we teach, the incorporation of these new technologies in the method by which teachers do their work, and a spirit of collaboration and sharing to make it easier for us to identify what works and what doesn't. This is all enabled by the work you do in building a utility-like service on data. But it matters that you actually go through the heavy lifting of tagging and resharing what works and what doesn't work. Last topic, energy. I thought I'd share with you why I believe the intersection of IT and energy holds great promise, just as we saw IT in health and IT in education. I want to begin by sharing two case studies where data is making a huge difference in a clean energy future. First and foremost is the story of solar costs. If any of you are following the costs of solar energy, we're down 80, 90% on the actual hardware and software associated with the conversion of sun power to energy. That reduction is happening worldwide. Yet, for some reason, we are still a more costly country in installing solar relative to places like Germany. What explains the gap? IT. The biggest difference in costs to install solar is not the hardware, it's in the permitting processes or the soft costs, customer acquisition costs, permitting processes that are all controllable if we use technology in a better way. In fact, the president has launched a $10 million prize competition $10 million is to the prize winner and $2.5 million for second and third place, for a race to the rooftop. The first team that can install solar on 1,000 roofs at an average of $1 a watt installed cost will win the prize. I hope, like Riley Crane won the DARPA Red Balloon Challenge, there's a team up and running here at IU, and you're supporting them in making it possible. Getting the local jurisdictions throughout Indiana to go to same-day permitting, to allow virtual permit submissions as opposed to having a physical inspector come out and check out the design. Similarly, there's the need to have a change in business model. So utilities today get paid more if you consume more energy, but if you save, they lose. States like California are experimenting with new reimbursement techniques that actually hold harmless the utility whether you save on your energy bill or not. That saving was brought to fore when I participated in a Clean Web hackathon that developed this thing called the Watt Quiz, helping consumers in California, when they can access their energy usage data using a green button. Healthcare is a blue button. Education, we didn't pick a color. It's called the My Data button. And in energy, we picked the green button. So these are all methods on which you can access your own sensitive personal data. So what Watt Quiz does is if you download your green button data from the utility and you upload it to the Watt Quiz, they can tell you, based on your last month's usage, which rate plan would save you the most money. And this particular actual case study demonstrated a 44% savings to the individual had they shifted to a different rate plan. This kind of consumer empowerment is just getting started. By the way, raise your hand if any of you have a smart meter at your house that's tracking your data, a couple of you. I have one at my house. My utility hasn't quite gotten religion yet. I still get my usage data as one value at the end of the month on my bill, even though the device has the capacity to collect usage every 6 seconds. Now, I may not want to look up www.whatismyusagerightnow.com because that's kind of a boring thing to look at. But if I hand that data stream to a third party and connect it to my smart thermostat like Nest, maybe I could get a price signal and say, Anish, if you lowered your consumption pattern right now based on the demand in the market for energy, we're at peak loads, you could save some money if you made some adjustments. That's coming, and that will lead to 10 to 15% savings. I'm particularly bullish on what this means for buildings. You can see a startup called Melon that now allows you to take your green button data if you're a small commercial building manager, and you can benchmark your building's energy performance against the EPA's National Portfolio Manager database. This kind of benchmarking tool gives you information about what you can do if you find yourself below the benchmark on how you can be more energy efficient. Data-driven decision-making. Who was the most active on this? A dorm at UNC Chapel Hill. Brad, I'm sorry to say it wasn't an IU institution, but a dorm at UNC Chapel Hill. What did they do? They mashed up their energy consumption data with the building's occupancy data, and they set some rules. If the building occupancy is less than 60%, we should let the building's HVAC controls float up or down. Saved over 36%, $250,000 in savings associated with their reuse of data. Saves money, improves the environment, grows the economy as companies that build tools to make this happen succeed in the marketplace. Final comments about talent. I think it's critical for us to understand that all of this happens if we have a workforce in this country that's capable of delivering these results, to be creative, to take advantage of the openness of the information, to build new products and services. I want to just say one big story, then I'll close out with a couple more smaller ones, of Victor Garcia. Victor Garcia was a Sizzler waiter. He was a Mexican immigrant, came to this country at the age of 5, but saw a television ad while waiting tables at Sizzler that he could be an auto designer. He wanted to then design sports cars. He went and pursued his degrees to get some technical work. He graduated, but let's just say he wasn't on the big three automakers list of the first recruits out of the gate. So Victor found himself as an entry-level contract worker at a trucking company in Texas, probably a decade or more away from anyone looking at his work to see whether his designs should make it. At the exact same time of Victor's journey on his professional career, the military was responding to the president's call to action to be more open and collaborative. And it turns out that the military spends a ton of money making stuff, and it's not very productive. There's an expression called Augustine's Law for Norm Augustine. This particular statement is pretty shocking because it's been true over the decades. What Norm Augustine said is that by the year 2054, the cost to produce a single aircraft carrier will exceed the entirety of the DoD budget. And based on the F-35, the most recent Joint Strike Fighter that's in a mess, you can see that we've followed Augustine's Law since 1910. Shocking. So the military decided we've got to cut not 5%, not 10%, but 80% in the cost to produce a new manufactured item. So to test this hypothesis, can they do it, they decided to crowdsource the initial entry. They said, what we're going to do is offer a very modest prize, like a $10,000 prize, if someone could help us design a new combat support vehicle capable of helping to medevacing 2 injured soldiers from the battlefield. They gave 3 weeks' time for contestants to participate, and they announced it on Twitter, Facebook, and other social media. Tens of thousands of people answered the call, including Victor Garcia. Now, to put this in context, it takes the DoD more than 3 weeks to add a comma to an RFP. Yet here they were putting a call to action to get results. Now, Victor's wife was pregnant, and because he was an entry-level worker, he had no insurance. What Victor decided to do was to put all his heart and soul to winning this competition. It would afford him the money to buy health insurance, and he could demonstrate that he has the talent all along. You can get to the punchline. Victor Garcia submits the flip mode, which is the graphic on the upper left. He comes in first place, wins the prize, and I had the great privilege of calling DARPA to say, is there any way Victor and his team can make it to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on June 24th? Why? Because President Obama was announcing the National Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, and he wanted to personally thank the team that not only designed the vehicle, but built a prototype in 4 months. This is the power when you uncover hidden talent. Or Bob, Dave, and Andrew, 3 tech dudes that work at a nonprofit educational organization who saw a contest to make sense of open government data, looked for the most complicated data set they could find to make it more accessible, and it was the Federal Register, the most boring document ever printed on the planet. I really feel sad for people that have to read it every day. Well, what Bob, Dave, and Andrew decided to do in a matter of weeks was take the API and produce a brand new Federal Register, one that was dramatically more engaging than the website federalregister.gov. The Archivist of the United States was so impressed with their contest, he called them and said, the 75th anniversary for my agency is coming up in 3 months. Can you take over my website and deliver it from what you guys have done? They said, no, we did this on a lark. We did it at Starbucks on a weekend. We're not doing this for a living. Yet they turned around and said, yes, sir. Today, federalregister.gov is powered by Bob, Dave, and Andrew, and every few weeks they're throwing out a new feature. The level of innovation on that service is something I had never seen before. Finally, we understand that to get there, we need an all-hands-on-deck approach. This cannot be reserved for the privileged few that go to computer science programs and have expertise in big data analytics. We need a way to get everybody at the table. We need to rethink what STEM means in the 21st century economy, and for me, that is a broader definition that emphasizes the et of STEM, the engineering and the technologist. If you remember the old Votech days of plumbing and electrical work and welding, we now have to modernize those sectors of the American economy so that they can be equipped to help folks participate in this vibrant and open, innovative ecosystem. If we do this, America's best days are ahead. Thank you so much. Brad. Let's rock and roll, man.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, we've got about 10 minutes for some questions, so we'll be monitoring the Twitter stream if you want to tweet some questions out. I think they're going to give us a moment to sit down here. I'm going to lead off with a question. Anish, you're really all about scale. You think big. You're trying to change the behemoth of the federal government and other areas that you've worked. So as I listened, what I heard was, in many cases, the data are there, the problems are there, smart people and innovation are there, networks are there. So how do we overcome the no, we can't do that, or no, my data, these have to be secure, my data can't be trusted to be opened up? Have a seat.
You know, it starts with air cover from the boss. So when the president...
I can do that.
Yeah, so when you provide air cover, then people realize that they have access to information. The public has access to information that they've paid for. The second piece that we learned was, to me, this is actually an era of platforms. Mm-hmm. So by shifting the data into platforms that are standardized, now it makes it easier, almost frictionless, for the agencies to participate. Because we asked them in 90 days in our culture, with this open government directive, sorry, Brad, 60 days. Every agency had to publish 3 high-value data sets just to get the culture back on the spirit of openness.
So what was it like overcoming that? Because I can imagine the objections
It's all culture. It's all culture, Brad. And I got to tell you, the beauty of this was that frontline workers saw this not as an unfunded mandate, but a chance to shine. One thing I didn't mention is that the participants in a lot of these open data competitions are frontline workers who they have an idea and their boss would say, no, you can't do your idea. Brad, now they're building apps on the weekend and showing prototypes to their boss to say, hey, we've already got it and it's getting traction. So now frontline workers see a new tool in the toolkit to advance their mission objective, and that's why there's actually a lot more support from the bottom waiting for someone with air cover. It's really the management middle that's been the headache, and they kind of, they've been now gotten religion in many cases.
So the first time I met Anish was at the EDUCAUSE conference, and he was there serving the role somewhat as the irritant of essentially, he took the CIOs and others, and he said, you guys really need to open up education in ways, and not open courses, that wasn't the point, but open the big blue button idea of being able to go and a student extract his or her transcript, things such as that. And he had an army, the first year EDUCAUSE had Innovation Alley. So there were a lot of students who came in with ideas and had built a little bit of software in some very young stage companies that said, we can fix that old higher ed IT beast and we can drag it into the 21st century. So the question that I want to ask you, now that you're talking to the keepers of the beast, what's some advice for us in how to move with some of the ideas that we talked about there, empowering students, empowering faculty with these ideas? What can we do?
So I believe in this concept of an innovation pipeline management, which is to say, test, validate, then scale. You have scale in mind, but maybe you're a little bit scared to do something. I'll give you an example.
So a small blue button.
Do a little pilot. So where I met Brad, we were discussing this issue. Your student information systems presumably have access to all of the courses the students take. Your bookstore has its database of the ISBN numbers that match up. And so the one little hack we were trying to figure out is, could we do a better job of giving students information for shopping on more cost-effective, like your eText model? The eText model becomes a much more obvious choice because it's cost-effective and it's a better value to the consumer, but maybe there's an app that provides that kind of decision support engine, if you will. Well, the way we thought about this was, define the problems you'd love to see solved, find the data sets that could be contributing to solving it, organize a codathon, or we called them hackathons, and invite folks to come in for the weekend and just build what they might think is interesting. And I did this at Virginia Tech. We called it the Hokie Health Codathon, and we focused on healthcare. And in one weekend, we had the CIOs from the hospital side of the area plus the university side. And within the weekend, by the weekend's end, these 25 random kids that showed up had built over a dozen products and services. One of them got nationally featured by what they were doing to make the local economy work better. So if you've got a problem you want solved, you know where the data sets are, invite the public to come in and build prototypes, and you'll see what's possible. And then you might want to build some industrial strength stuff on the back end.
I can tell you, we have a whole stream of questions. You have an eager audience. The audience is asking lots of variants of the same question of how do we get moving onto this? How do we start this happening? So I think you've heard already the notion of prototypes. And I really like this point that you've made. Scale is what you want in the end. We're 8 campuses, 115,000 students, and ultimately innovations can go beyond us, but start small. I think that's a really important point. If you think about the connection between Anish's talk with opening up and innovation and the concerns of the panel this morning, the rightful concerns, we are the stewards and the caretakers of privacy in this community in some way, and security for areas where we have federal compliance with FERPA law or HIPAA on the healthcare side. But this notion of how individuals, frontline staff, who have ideas can move this forward, I think is a really important point for us in always learning. Now, I don't want to miss the opportunity, since it is in the news today, and we were talking about this briefly backstage. So we're trying to do something to go to scale pretty fast with healthcare.gov.
Yes.
And you were giving a little information back there at some of the approaches that were thought through in the earliest stages of this. Maybe you could share with our technical audience here some of the trade-offs and choices that were made and what we're learning from this.
So there are 2 areas that I think are lessons learned in only the last several weeks. So let's go through them. The first one is this idea of cloud versus legacy infrastructure. And all of us live in this world. The challenge of when can we move to the cloud? When are the privacy and security rules appropriate? So the challenge for us was, and I hope this may be the case, that this may be the last project that really is built in the legacy environment, because it took us until 2013 to get the cloud vendors to be certified under what's called the FedRAMP program, which is the privacy and security standards for federal government. And by the way, the universities, I think, can plug right into the FedRAMP certification process. So the Microsoft Cloud, the Amazon Cloud, they are now, you can buy the version that's FedRAMP certified. But those were not available when healthcare.gov made its initial choices. So what you're reading in the paper reads a lot more like legacy infrastructure, not because they weren't aware of the cloud, but because the security and privacy standards hadn't yet been met. So I think the first tension is, what's the technical architecture for some of this? The second one is, the story's not yet played out, but it's an important one to understand. In the policy, we designed healthcare.gov with the presumption that not everybody would visit healthcare.gov. You will learn shortly that a series of companies called web-based entities can essentially provide the shopping experience, but in a private sector way. They get a reimbursement model. They're going to get paid broker commissions. So there's an incentive for these companies to build these innovative products, and they'll compete over how to make it easier for the consumer to find a plan that's right for them. They're not yet online, but when they do, you'll find that there'll be healthcare.gov as one of many destinations. So there should be no wrong door, which is another interesting question when we think about our role. Are we building the destination site, or are we supplying the data that could then be put to use in multiple destination sites that we may or may not fully control? Business models are a separate matter, but this is this. And I would just point out, the original version of healthcare.gov that my successor, Todd Park, led, the one that went live in 90 days, that was built with an API. That was not. That was basically a catalog of public and private insurance options. If you go to U.S. News and World Report today, and you type in the health insurance finder, that entire site is powered by healthcare.gov data from the original version. That is a list of all public and private insurance options sold in America. The current version is the marketplace, but the original version was sort of the comprehensive catalog. And that openness is what led to companies like U.S. News investing.
So this openness, as we were discussing, I also play a role on the IU Health Bloomington Hospital board, and Indiana University, you should have seen a note from HR some weeks or months ago about a service that we've signed up for, and someone's going to have to remind me of the name. Is it Gaslamp?
Castlight.
Castlight, thank you. And where you can go and see all of these shopping, literally what's the price of, I need to have a particular procedure done, local providers. You know, do you save hundreds and hundreds of dollars if you just drive over to Brown County and have it done there, or if you go to Indianapolis? And so this transparency of this is just remarkable. We've never had that before. Of course, on the hospital side, that presents us with some challenges.
Correct.
As we continue to align our business model. Last question that I'll just, due to time, if you were visiting us again in 1 year, we will have this conference next year. If you were coming back in 1 year, within the means of what Indiana University can do with our data sources, what do you hope we will accomplish?
Well, my first and foremost hope is that the level of product and service innovation will dramatically increase. So there won't be just one eText platform, but there might be a dozen student retention strategies that are deployed in new products and services powered by IU data, but may not be built on the balance sheet of IU. That's my hope number one. My hope number two is that on healthcare, the country's on this fast journey to value-based care delivery, and my real hope is that IU can be a leader in some of those early examples of what it means, like can you produce a list to the primary care doctors of the patients that need them to call outbound as opposed to them waiting for the patient to call in, and those kinds of population health capabilities, so that it's in Indiana that we found the way to lower costs, improve quality, that there's a research element to this, there's an actual university health system delivery aspect of this, and then you're training a workforce to be able to think differently about the jobs in healthcare. All three in combination could be done, and I think a year from now there could be a couple of prototypes that are very, very exciting to watch. See, that's validation from the fireworks outside. Yes, IU can do it.
I thought that was just your stomach. We'll wrap it up. The key point of bringing Anish paired with the morning panel about privacy, security, and the growing threats in a cyber war world was to say what a tremendous time for IT professionals and the stewards of IU data sets to be always learning about how we continue to reshape and reshape and reshape IU to the very best opportunities that are out there. We've got a great conference lined up for the rest of today and tomorrow. There's over, I think, 60 breakout sessions, just more than you can possibly get to. I know we had queues and things at some of the doors last year. They're doing their best to get the right sessions balanced to the right areas. I hope you will take every opportunity today at lunch and through the day to meet people outside of your area. One of the things you heard that you may be able to, you may know a lot about glaciers, but you solve problems in astronomy. So this is an opportunity for you to reach outside of your technical area, your functional area, your campus, and meet people. We have a big blowout staff appreciation event tonight out at the Cyber Infrastructure Building. I hope everybody will be able to join us for that, and I will wrap up tomorrow at the luncheon with my thoughts on always learning. Enjoy the statewide IT conference. Anish, thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Excellent.